so much waiting for this finale, the most important panel, I believe. So it is about government leadership for worker ownership, but we have some story about this one. Okay, so we have amazing panelists from all different states, and that they will share their expert knowledge and their experience and insight about the government leadership and worker ownership. Especially when we think about employee ownership ecosystem, then the company is not only one actor or player in this infrastructure or ecosystem or community capital. So we can think about at least 4 different kinds of stakeholders or supporters: state leadership, legislature, state program, Center for Employee Ownership. And then there are something more, so you can think about, you can help us to figure out who are more important and who are also important stakeholders. Okay? Here, so we have 4 panelists that will talk about this issue. So first, the Lieutenant Governor from the state of Rhode Island, Sabina Matos, she will talk about state leadership, the role of the state leadership. And then Matt Lucina, now he's in NCEO, but he was in Colorado before. So he will talk about the roles, background, experience about legislatures, about the worker ownership and the employee ownership ecosystem. And then Lorena Lowell from Washington, the state of Washington, she will also she will share experience about the Washington case. The last one, also very important, Center for Employee Ownership. So one of the advanced models of Center for Employee Ownership from Pennsylvania. So Kevin McPhillips, he will also share his experience and insight about Center for Employee Ownership. Okay? So the first panelist, the Lieutenant Governor of Rhode Island, Sabina Matos. She's a 70th Lieutenant Governor of the state of Rhode Island, and then chair of the Small Business Advocacy Council. And then she advocates Rhode Island small business, including pushing to create Center for Employee Ownership, and she's a big fan of employee ownership and worker ownership. So please welcome Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Lee Ochegu. It's hard for me not to call you Professor.
Sure. So this is going forward.
So I want to say thank you for this opportunity to speak about employee ownership and to learn from all of you also about employee ownership. As Professor Lee mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of employee-owned company, and I'm going to tell you how I learned about it. I was at the Lieutenant Governor's Conference about 2.5 years ago. The first time that I heard a concept that, as I was sitting here, it's so good to be in a room with people that understand what the silver tsunami is, right? Because it feels like only the people working in this space of employee ownership are paying attention to the silver tsunami. So when I was sitting here and I heard that all of you knew what it was like, good, I'm in a good group of people, right? So I learned about this concept, and I learned about how employee ownership could be the answer to the challenges that we're going to be facing with the silver tsunami. In the state of Rhode Island, we have over 110,000 small businesses. And as I chair the Small Business Advocacy Council, we tend to hear a lot from the small business community about the challenges that are going through, and we hear a lot about businesses that are closing. And employee ownership could be the answer. Right now in the state of Rhode Island, over half of our small business owners are over the age of 55. So that means that these are the people that within the next 5, 10, 15 years are going to be retiring. More and more we learn that their kids don't want to continue the footsteps of their parents. And in many cases, there is not a succession plan in place for those businesses. That's why I believe it's so important that the state of Rhode Island takes an active role on ensuring that we are planning ahead. Because, as all of you know, if we wait until the last minute, it's going to be too late. It's going to be too late. The employees, the business owners that think that they're going to be able to sell their business when they're ready to retire, they're faced with the big challenge that 80% of those businesses that are put up for sale don't find a buyer. So they have to close and shut their doors. What would happen to our community if we have all of those businesses closing down? We have all those storefronts that are shut down in our neighborhoods, right? And we have all those companies that either could be bought from an entity outside that doesn't guarantee that they're going to continue to have a presence in our state. And if they take the businesses out of our state, we're losing the tax revenue that comes to the state of Rhode Island, and we're losing the jobs that are available in our state. But then when we think about the impact on the workers, right? If those workers are faced with the situation in which the business was taken out of our state, or it was shut down because the business owner didn't have a plan in place, and they lose their jobs, they lose their health insurance, and in many cases, they lose years of sacrifice and commitment to a company, and everything can be gone at a moment notice, just when the owner decides to retire. That's why I believe that the state of Rhode Island needs to have an active role in ensuring that we create a center for employee-owned company. We don't have one. There are over 20 other states that already have a center for employee-owned. And I'm so fortunate to be here with all of you to learn from other states and from my fellow panelists to learn about what is happening in other states. Because at the same time, I feel like we are late to the game, but at the same time, we are in a good position because we can learn from others. We can learn, and this is the research that my office has been doing, is what is working in one state and what is working and what is not working. And we ask the question, if you could have the opportunity to start all over again, what would you change about your model? As we learned probably through the conference, are going to hear from other states, there are different models. There are those that are part of the state, those are those that are part of a nonprofit or state-owned commerce. So we are in a position which we're able to ask questions and learn and ask, what would you change from the model that you're using right now? So as I keep saying, I'm still on denial about my glasses, so I think I'm going to see, and then I got to go back and take a look at it. So one of the challenges that we have found is in creating a center for ownership is that here in Rhode Island, because we're small, we don't have the services, the professional services that can support this huge need that we're going to have to support employee ownership. We don't have enough lawyers that specialize in employee ownership. We don't have enough accountants that specialize in employee ownership. So we are doing the work of working with different institutions, working with universities, to see how can we create that class curriculum that's going to support the Center for Employee Ownership in our state. some of the struggles that we have found is the access to capital. I was so fortunate to hear part of the previous conversation here, learning about the access to capital. And one of the things that as I heard the conversation here happening, state governments, before being a state government, I used to be in the Providence City Council, and I was president of the Providence City Council. And one of the things that I know we can do also at the city level is dedicate resources to back the funding to ensure that more financial institutions are willing to lend to employee-owned companies. When I was in the Providence City Council, we had the access to the CDBG funding, and we had a lending mechanism through the CDBG funding. And what if we had put more of those resources towards opportunities that were gonna fund more employee ownership? And this is the things that I'm looking for the future in the state of Rhode Island. We created a working group, and Jacob DeBeclure, who's here with me, is leading that work. Since I learned about the employee ownership and I learned about the Silver Tsunami, I wanted to do something, right? Fortunately, I have Jacob that joined the team, and he just has been running with it and has been doing so much good work. So we have our business enterprise succession passport, or as Jacob likes to say, the best team, right? So the best team, what we're doing is looking at all of those challenges, learning from other states, learning what resources we need. One of the things that the team did was to put out a survey to business owners, asking them if they had a succession plan in place and asking them what they were thinking about succession planning. And we learned a lot from that survey that we did. And what we have been learning is that 60% of small business that completed our survey, in many of them, 60 small business has completed, and 50% of them indicate that they are interested in some type of employee ownership. And I think those are good numbers, honestly. Those are good numbers. And two of the biggest concerns among them is retiring for the business owners and in the leadership transition. What we found is that after someone, we had this experience actually right during one of the meetings of the Small Business Advocacy Council, in which I was talking to one of the members who's a long-time food manufacturer. And I was explaining to her the concept. And she told me, my employees cannot run the business. When I'm out on vacation, they keep calling me, like they don't know how to do it, right? So we went through this process, and I asked her, are your kids gonna take over the business? Oh, my kids want nothing to do with the business, right? So do you have a plan about who's gonna take it? She started thinking about it. And then the other thing that I mentioned to her, employee ownership doesn't necessarily equal management. There are different ways in which a business can be managed, and there could be a management team in place. And after that, things turned for her, and she started thinking that maybe this is the solution for her business. And we're still in the middle of this process. We're still learning. We're still getting feedback from the business community. And our hope is that we can create a center for employee ownership in the state of Rhode Island that doesn't dictate what type of businesses it's gonna be. We don't want to dictate it have to be a co-op, it have to be an ESOP, it have to be a profit sharing. We want to be able to have all the resources available for the employees and the business owners to be able to make an informed decision about what makes sense for them. We don't want to dictate what is gonna be the model that they're gonna choose. We want them to be able to have the resources, have the support, and for them to decide what is the best model for them. I'm looking forward to your questions and to exchange between all of us later, but thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you. And then second panelist, Matthew Licina. Now he's currently technical content manager at National Center for Employee Ownership. But I think he just joined the NCEO about 2 months ago, right? About 2 months ago. Yeah. So previously he was in the state of Colorado. So he directed all employee ownership tax credit program in Colorado. So he's kind of legend persons in the Colorado's tax credit bills. So basically, the Matt will explain about and all the historical background, what's going on in tax credit bills in the Colorado.
Thanks, Jagu. All right. Thanks everyone for being here and for sticking around. I guess they saved the best for the last. So my goal is to come in under on time. So hopefully I achieve that goal. But I really do actually want to achieve the goal of explaining some of the bills that we've gotten passed through the legislature and how we were able to activate a robust ecosystem for employee ownership. A lot of states are looking up to Colorado, and I want to tell you a little bit about how things came to be. So prior to joining the NCEO as technical content manager a couple months ago, I served as the only employee of the Colorado Employee Ownership Office. I was a program manager for a couple years and worked on 4 bills. that I'm going to go into a little detail on. Before that, I did work for Evergreen Cooperatives in Cleveland, Ohio, which has come up through a few of the presentations today. I'm actually from Cleveland. I learned about Evergreen Cooperatives while I was studying co-ops and alternative economic models at UC Davis. So I did just want to share a little bit about my experience. Yesterday, we talked about how to incorporate more of these employee ownership or alternative economic models into the curriculum of business schools. And I will say that, I had a unique experience where I was introduced to it at school. But more on that later or after my presentation. If you want to chat with me, I'd love to tell you more. So what really made employee ownership click in Colorado? So the Governor Jared Polis, who's serving a second term right now, he actually advocated for employee ownership while he was on the campaign trail. And we're lucky enough in Colorado to have a governor that is in strong support of these types of economic policies and initiatives. He actually followed through when he was elected, and he set up quickly thereafter by executive order a commission on employee ownership, as well as some tax credit policy that I'll get into in a second here. So in the early days, it was really, fundamental to our success to have the experts on the commission informing the policy. Kind of having that type of relationship was super important. And a lot of people ask, or they just assume that maybe in Colorado, the secret sauce is just having a governor that's pro-employee ownership. It was a big part of our development, but it really actually is founded on just having healthy and strong relationships in the state amongst the practitioners. And that's one of the things I think that this event is doing a really good job at executing on, is having a diverse audience. So thanks to Tony and team for having us all here today to share this discussion. So a little bit detail about some of the building blocks for employee ownership in Colorado. And this is going to be leg heavy, so legislation heavy. So I will try to be brief, but I wanted to first kind of go in chronological order of what's been activated. There is one bill that's not here that involved a revolving loan fund, which is a critical piece of the employee ownership puzzle, if you will, having the funds to get the job done. We heard about that from experts earlier today in the program. But these are the bills that have been passed or are on Gov's desk. This bottom one is, I'll get to that in a second. But these are all active programs right now. And some of them are related, but I'll start with 21-13-11. This is from the 2021 session. This is a tax credit that has been kind of modeled or copied by other states. An example would be 1407 from Senator Becker in California. This is a conversion tax credit. So this is a model that is it's not unique just to Colorado. There were other programs similar to this in nature before Colorado ran this bill, but this one was the largest. It was $50 million over 5 years, and it was aimed purely at the conversion juncture in the time horizon of converting to employee ownership. So kind of a reimbursement tax credit to help folks convert and maybe remove some of the risk, if you will, but also really just incentivize them. When I left the office a couple months ago at the top of the year, there were 11 credits issued and 12 in the pipeline. The highest capital threshold is $150,000 for reimbursement for an ESOP conversion, because those are also the most costly ones. So, it's a reimbursement model. That's how government likes to do things. There are some drawbacks to that, especially for disadvantaged populations and folks. There's also, it's quite a long process, right? We've heard about it. It's costly and takes a while. So, that model does have some drawbacks and important considerations. The next bill was 1081. This is the first bill that I worked on. This was the expansion of the program that was established by 21-13-11. So this really sought to bring more into the fold in how we define employee ownership. There were a lot of firsts in this bill. We upped the capital thresholds for the structures themselves. We also added alternative equity structures. That's basically everything that's not EOT, employee ownership trust, worker cooperative, ESOP. It's everything else, but with pretty, defined guardrails, but they're broad. But, defining things is important. Depends on who you ask in the ecosystem, how much definitional criteria there should be. But we're government. We like the guardrails. So we basically sought to include anything that included a minimum 20% inclusion for participation, allocation of equity or diluted securities, informational rights, granting those rights, and decision-making rights. So really all of the other structures should fit in that, but we really wanted to kind of increase what we were allowing to be eligible for the tax credit. There's no way to track a lot of these other structures that are, really ESOP is one of the only ones that's easily tracked, and NCEO has been doing that for a while, cleaning the DOL report that lags a couple years. But it's a little difficult to reach out to businesses or practitioners that are setting up these structures if there is no way to track them. So it's one important consideration there. 24-1157. This was another first in the nation. This is the first tax credit program that's oriented towards ongoing support for the business once they've set up the structure successfully. So the idea here is wraparound and stacking. We want to see folks claim both tax credits in succession, no pun intended, and we want to see them actually thrive going into the future. So maybe they want to join NCEO to get access to all of our great resources, or they want to engage with legal counsel for ongoing legal needs that weren't expected. These are kind of making these firms more robust and making sure that they thrive. This also was the bill that codified our office into statute, which didn't actually come first, so that's something to note here. Some state centers actually do that earlier on, and it also was the first time. So 2021 to 2024 bill was the first time that there was a budget appropriation for a salary for the office. So we were using strategic funds to staff the office. So again, like Governor Polis supporting the office and making sure that we got the job done was important here, but also to note, like with what happened in California with Senator Becker's 1407 bill, there was no budget play, and they've gone for it at least twice now. So something to note, you kind of need the funding to get the job done. And there was no other operational budget. So there's all these things that you want to accomplish when you set up a program like this. But if there's only one person and no budget, what can you get done? 25-1021, that's a bill that is likely just placed on Governor Polis's desk. This is the last piece of legislation I had the honor of working on when I was serving in state government. This is a pretty unique bill. I encourage you to check it out. It's just a matter of time before it becomes law now. But there is a capital gains subtraction as well as a worker cooperative subtraction for businesses in the state. There's also some funding to nonprofit support entities, and they can claim that if they're helping businesses convert to employee ownership. This is going to help us, I think, adapt and grow the ecosystem. But there's still a lot of work to be done when we're looking at financing these deals. There's some other programs in the state that we have worked really hard because we have the subject matter expertise in the state government to include these employee ownership use cases. So U.S. Treasury funded SSBCI program that Professor Blasi spoke about and actually worked with the Treasury on to include more employee ownership use cases. We baked that in, so it's part of the offering. And we also activated some ARPA funds, some COVID recovery response funds to provide technical assistance, but it's really not enough to really drive the needle, in my personal opinion, because we're still dealing with a lot of financial institutions that maybe don't know how to lend to employee-owned firms, or the process of requiring personal guarantees can be quite prohibitive. So it's really important to, continue to work with all the folks in the space, whether they're in the borders of the state or not, because it's not just really one entity, one support entity that's going to get the job done. And I think that's really actually the secret sauce for Colorado, is all the folks that work together to get it done. So the commissioners, 12, they're governor appointed, they're volunteer based, they have no decision-making power in a formal sense, but they're experts. They're helping inform the government on what bills to take forward and what to make sure is included. The nonprofits that were around in the state long before our office or my former position existed, like Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, Center for Community Wealth Building. There's so many folks out there, and I think what we should use to judge the health of a robust ecosystem is the strength of the relationships. I work for NCEO now, so I'll add this in. Here's what we do. We do events and we do resources. We have a lot of peer networks, but we'll be in Philly, which is not too far from here as the crow flies. And to Philly, if you're interested in connecting in a business-to-business environment, we encourage you to come. We'll be doing some employee ownership trust programming. We have a lot of research that Corey spoke about yesterday, the co-founder of NCEO. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Matt. Next panelist from the state of Washington, Lorena Lowell. She's inaugural director of Washington State Employee Ownership Program. And then Washington State, as you know, recently launched a tax credit program. And then recently, she and the program itself, they have been going through some lot of experience. So she will share the experience about the state of Washington.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. So I do want to start by thanking all of you for inviting me. It's a very kind invitation to be part of this exciting group, an incredible conversation. I am incredibly humble and honored to be here. I also want to thank Matt and Corey. They have been instrumental to help me, very generous with their time, their patience, their expertise the last 14 months as I can be new into this position, and we start building this program from the ground up, which is a very, very exciting process from the beginning to the sunset that we are about to face. In 2023, right, in 2023, a very comprehensive bipartisan bill, Senate Bill 1596, was led by Senator Patton and passed unanimously, fully funded till 2030. The intent of this bill was to create a state program for the employee ownership program for the state of Washington. It also created a state commission that was governor appointed with 11 members, 2 senators, 2 representatives, and 4 members from the business community. We also have appropriation for the tax credit. We have $2 million a year for a tax credit. And we also have allowance and appropriation from the state to create loans and grants to support conversion. As you can see, this was the whole deal. This was the big deal. And it was the first bill in the country that has all these components. The key mandates of this bill and in this program were to educate, to assist, to remove barriers, identify and remove barriers, to offer the tax credit, I've been sick all week, and create a loan and grant opportunities. This is the Jolie said, this is a very interesting, and honestly, I just gotta be honest, it's a very honestly challenging and emotional conversation for me. Provided that 14 months ago, the program was launched and started, and only 8 weeks ago, during the last session, another bill, the House Bill 24/7, was introduced in the House to completely eliminate the program and the commission. Few weeks, this was a very interesting session, and an amendment bill was submitted at the Senate, which this bill basically removes the tax credit and leaves the program and leaves the commission pending to funding, which basically what many of you asked me through the last 2 days, what's going to happen? What's happening? What's happening? And what's next? Well, what is next? We don't know yet. It is at the governor's office. I tried to get some information today to see if I can tell you what's going to happen, but I don't know yet. He's deciding. But most likely what is going to happen is we're going to go dormant. What does that mean is the program will remain in the statute with all the components. The commission will remain a statute, but we will not have funding, which means that the program will close down permanently at the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th. The tax credit, unfortunately, is eliminated. And if when the program is revived, perhaps there will be a new legislation to kind of revive or bring the tax credit back. This, in my personal opinion, is an incredible setback to the state of Washington. With that said, I understand the constraints of a state budget and balancing budget in face of all the challenges that we're having as a nation. With that, I would like to kind of tell you a little bit and show you a little bit about what the program is, the tax credit. Everything was very unique, and we worked really hard. The members of the legislative body worked really hard in ensuring that it was a very comprehensive program and it was easy. And we did a lot of work among the state agencies. There was a lot, it's kind of hard to explain. I've been in the business world for 30 years and I have done and launched about 30 startups in the corporate world. And this was a startup in government, which was incredibly interesting and to kind of do. You know, we have some components of the real world in the corporate world because we're working with business and we have real tangible needs for businesses. Yet we have to be on the other side, mediating legislation, laws, rules, and a system that we have to work with. So this is the old. So it's okay. Let's see. Well. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the tax credit, how our tax credit works. Our tax credit, so in the bill, it was not a very clear bill in a lot of areas. It was very gray. So it mentioned our office was housed under Commerce, and the Department of Revenue was in charge of the tax credit, the implementation of tax credit. Didn't really speak about how we're going to work together. So in the being, great. We had long conversations, months of conversations between the Department of Revenue and the Department of Commerce, our direct offices work. And we ended developing a very simple four-step process and takes 7 weeks, I promise you, 7 weeks from the time that the business submit the application to where they receive the credit. 1, 2, 3, 4. So have 5 minutes. So the process was, the businesses go to their Department of Revenue page. They have their portal. In the portal, there was a tax credit process was already there. We simplify it to 5 questions and a list of documents that they needed to submit. So they just have to kind of go there. The business was already registered, blah, blah, blah. Then they submit all their documentation, and then the team within the Department of Revenue review the documents. 7 weeks turnaround, and the credits were applied to their account. That simple as that. We had 2 offices, and we were providing technical assistance to businesses, my office. And by the way, I was the only person. We never worked to hire anybody. So I was the only one doing all of this. So the Department of Revenue created an office to be able kind of to support that. And I will give you some of the quick numbers that we have. So that's the tax credit. So some of the impact that we have within only 1 year was 3 ESOPs where companies received the $100,000 tax credit. The tax credit was up to $100,000 for reimbursement of expenses for ESOPs, $25,000 for co-ops, and $25,000 for trust. But we were able to 3 companies applied and received the $100,000. 2 were engineer firms. One was food company. We impacted 310 employees, and their sales were 48 million. Based on the Tsunami numbers of the companies that we have in the state of Washington, potentially within the next 5 to 7 years, we estimated that we could have 70 conversions, impacting 60,000 jobs, contributing to $3 billion in payroll, and generating $14 billion in revenue. And then do the math on the taxes. So I want to close with a couple of things. For the key initiatives for 2025, I was in the process of writing myself all the WATs, the Washington Administrative Code for the state of Washington, that we're going to align with our RCWs to be able to operate the program. We were to finish that. We were launching a very, very detailed technical assistance program. We were allocating $2 million to be able to pass through to other organizations, profits and not-for-profits, so they could provide a technical assistance. And the technical assistance one was to go on the ground. So we wanted to make sure that these businesses had accounting, legal, and all the kind of support and expenses paid for. It was a very comprehensive plan. We also started have more strengthening our relationships. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that we were maximizing the $2 million a year that we have allocated for tax credit. So in closing, there's a lot of lessons learned. There is a lot of experience. There's also a lot of community. There's a lot of support. And one of the things that have been the most significant for me was in the last session, we received 168 letters of support from all over the country, unsolicited from me. They were like, the support, the working relationship that we created. It was, I think if anything is to learn from this program, from this project, and these experiences, it is needed, it is welcome, it is supported, and unfortunately, like Corey said yesterday, sometimes is not a priority in some budgets. So I'm not saying it's not a priority for the governor. I'm not saying that by any means, but sometimes it's just we don't move enough, and we don't move fast enough to be able to kind of make a difference in the sense that we can kind of have more resources allocated. But this is a program that has real impact and really fast and is needed. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lorena.
I'm so sorry about that.
So if you want to write a letter to her, so I will share her address later.
Yeah, thank you.
Oops. Okay. So next and fourth and final panelist, Kevin McPhillip. He's right now Executive Director of Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership. Actually, throughout his 30-year experience in private, public, and business-owned, and then other kinds of several different kinds of business experience, he became to believe that employee ownership is really, really great investment. So Kevin will share about how Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership has been achieving something, because Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership is one of the advanced center for employee ownership in the nation. So please welcome Kevin Phillips here.
Thank you, Jagu, and thank you, and thanks to Harvard for the kind invitation to come here. It's very much appreciated, and I'm particularly honored to be the conference caboose. So, thank you to those of you that stayed, and if you need a nap, take a nap. All right. So as Jagu said, I'm with the Pennsylvania Center for Employee Ownership. There are over 20 employee ownership state centers today, as the Lieutenant Governor shared, and they're all a little different. Some of them do research. Some of them do technical assistance. Some of them are university-based. Some of them are independent. Our organization, the Pennsylvania Center, is an independent 501c3, and we exist to do one thing and one thing only, which is to raise awareness about the benefits of employee ownership. We don't do research. We don't do technical assistance. In effect, we're a marketing organization trying to teach our community, our Commonwealth, about employee ownership. We've been around for 9 years, and we're really the brainchild of the NCEO, who conducted a white paper back in 2015, along with ESCA, that came to the blazingly obvious conclusion that the reason that there aren't more employee owners today is that people don't know about it. In a study that was done of selling shareholders, it was determined that 93% of selling shareholders in this study either did not know of or consider employee ownership when they sold their companies. So that's what we're about. We're about chipping away the 93%. And we do things like Chamber of Commerce programs, we do Business Vistas programs, we do marketing, we do reports, we do op-eds, we do a lot of things. But I didn't feel like we were moving the needle. So we decided to try an experiment. And in 2019, we met with the then mayor of Pittsburgh, Bill Peduto, to tell him about employee ownership. He didn't know anything about it. And he thought it was a great idea, and he said, let's have hearings in city council. And we did that. We had hearings in January of 2019. And at the end of the hearing, one of the city council members, whose name is Erica Strasburger, and a really unique person, actually ended up in tears at the end of the thing. We tell a lot of stories about how employee ownership affects the lives of individuals. And she called me after the meeting and she said, we have to do something about this. And we talked a bit, and we joined with, some of you may know my colleague David Feingold, former president of Chatham University. And Chatham, the Pennsylvania Center, and City Council grouped together and came up with a plan to create a task force on employee ownership, the nation's first citywide task force on employee ownership. And we put a group of leaders together. They included Pennsylvania's then Lieutenant Governor. And we chose the Lieutenant Governor because Lieutenant Governors are much better than governors. And we had members of City Council. We had members of County Commission. We had members of the General Assembly in Pennsylvania, presidents of universities. In other words, leaders that had history and understanding about how to do things. So we put this group together, and the group came up with a plan to do a large-scale, broad-based approach to 33,000 businesses in the city of Pittsburgh. We would do mailings, we would do emails, we would do radio, TV, podcasts, digital ad programs, and we'd also partner with community groups, neighborhood groups, et cetera, to have a bunch of meetings where we could teach people, give them toolkits on what we wanted to do. We're very grateful that the city of Pittsburgh and the Heinz Endowments supported this program for us. Without them, we could not have done it. We partnered with a whole bunch of community neighborhood groups with the idea of trying to get people in a room and teach them. One of the key things that we had to figure out was, what do we want to say? Okay, we talked to people. Okay, the messaging was very important. And right, wrong, or indifferent, we decided to sort of like bifurcate the businesses and say we're going to look at large companies that would be ESOPable, and we'll look at smaller companies that would be co-opable or EOTable. And we're also going to do some A/B testing. We want to have a financial message, and we want to have a social message, so we can determine, what really resonates with people. One of the lessons we learned was that the messenger was really important. My original thought was we'll have City Council send a message, or from the mayor's office, because if you get a letter or an email from the city, you're probably going to open it and take a look at it. You might cough first, but you'll look at it. And we've talked about that for a bit, and as crazy as this sounds, there are actually people that don't trust government. So we decided we weren't going to send it out from the city, but rather from one of our members, fellow named Bill Flanagan. Bill Flanagan is an extremely well-respected fellow in the city of Pittsburgh, part of the Economic Development Allegheny Conference. But more importantly, he was, for 25 years, he had a Sunday morning television program called Our Region's Business. Tremendously well-respected. And we said, and Bill said, I'll send them out. I'll let them come under my signature. So we did that. So we had, and I don't expect you to see this, but we had digital social messages, digital financial messages. This one was an example of our email social message, which was stable jobs, building worker savings, strengthening local communities. And then in a letter that we sent out, a physical letter in the mail, we sent a financial message that included fair financial return for the business owners, a ready buyer, and a staged sale if you wanted to do that. We created 3 websites. And the idea was to drive people to the websites. We also created 33,000 unique URLs and 33,000 unique QR codes. So every time someone came to the website, we had an enormous amount of information about them. We got a database through the Carnegie Library on originally 70,000 businesses that we netted down to 33. That included the business name, the location, number of employees, revenue, the industry they were in, and in some cases, age of owners. So when people came in, we knew who they were, and we could gather some really unique data about what worked and what didn't, whether industries, size of companies, etc. The website, which you can still go to, it's pghtaskforce.org, gave people resources if they wanted to take next steps. And we also partnered with some banks and some CDFIs to let people know if they wanted to get funding for what they needed to do, they could do that as well. We did 6 weeks of radio programming. 3 of these stations are NPR. We decided to do those. We thought that made sense. One of them was a music station. We had an interview on a podcast, CityCast Pittsburgh, with Erica Strausberger and former Representative Sarah Innamorato, who's now the Allegheny County Executive. We got on the podcast, we had 1,000 downloads, and we had 17,000 clicks on the website. So we learned a bunch of things going through this. So we approached 33,000 businesses, and we delivered 7,500 emails. We did 3 iterations of this, okay? So you triple that, and that's the amount of contact we had. At the end of all of it, by the end of 2024, we had 1,500 businesses that came to visit the site. We were very pleased with that. About 1,200 of those were return visitors, which meant that they were checking out again. And the average time on the site was about 4 minutes and 17 seconds. From a digital marketing standpoint, that's a long time. So we were pretty pleased with that. So the results were, we approached 33,000 businesses. We got 1,500 companies to come and learn about employee ownership. And in the 18-month period where we were marketing, there were 16 companies that converted in Pittsburgh alone, representing 12,500 new employee owners. Now, that wasn't all because of us, okay? But we believe that this model, it was significant. I mentioned we had some community groups we met with. This didn't work quite as well as we had hoped. We didn't get a whole lot of people to attend, but we had a lot of people to the website. So what's next? Well, we're now able to take this information, this data, and use it as a flag, okay? And talk to other places within the Commonwealth. We've met with City Council, Councilmember Rhode Landau, and they're interested in doing a task force in Philadelphia. We've just this week started a program of 80 weeks of radio spots on public radio, WHYY. We want to kind of prime the pump before we go back. We tried Philadelphia before, and it didn't work. We've agreed with the York County Economic Alliance to do a 3-county program in central Pennsylvania. The new Allegheny County Executive, Sarah Innamorato, has made the creation of an employee ownership task force one of the 6 economic development goals of Allegheny County, so we're pleased with that. And we're doing what we call our county model in Montgomery County and Eastern one, which is kind of a task force light. And finally, I'm very pleased to say that last month we launched Pennsylvania Senate Bill SP SB 478, which will create the Pennsylvania Office of Employee Ownership within the DCED, which is the Department of Community and Economic Development, and the Pennsylvania Employee Ownership Assistance Program Act, which will provide grant funding to investigate or convert to employee ownership. And with that, the caboose has left.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I think this is the first time somebody used 39 slides and the present in 10 minutes successfully. So I had a conversation with Kevin that, okay, it's too many slides, and he said, don't worry. So yeah, so he's really expert.
Very nervous, very nervous.
Okay, so now all the panelists, please come here. Yeah. Okay. Oh, mic over here. So who use mic? Okay. You can share this one. Okay, so for first 20 minutes, we have some moderated discussion based on 3 questions. So anyone can jump in, and then you can discuss, or if you want to debate. So first one is, we are talking about some kinds of community capital and the ecosystem right now. So what is the most effective approach to developing the ecosystem of employee ownership in state or municipal or city, that kinds of unit, especially if you can, like what kinds of role for each entity, like government, legislature, Center for Employee Ownership. So what is the most effective approach to developing employee ownership ecosystem? So based on your experience.
New question. I'm not sure that any government body would be able to know, because it's still pretty nascent out there, I would argue. But personally, I think that looking at the conversion potential and the fact that it takes such a long time and is so expensive to get the job done, these programs that we're seeing, from Colorado and other states that are activating similar programs, it's important to activate in like a piecemeal approach or stepping stone approach, because there's so many related things that go into converting a company fully. So exit and succession is related, but it doesn't always land with an EO transaction, right? An employee ownership transaction. So, bringing in eligibility, broadening it to enable folks to get the job done and support them through financial mechanisms earlier, I think can really help speed that up.
In our case, because we were so unique, I think we're great. So first we have our office was the state office, but we also have a Center for Employee Ownership. So the great thing about that combination is, on my end, on our office, we were able to look at policies and efficiencies within the government agencies, which it was very impactful. We were able, like a tax credit example that I gave, we were able to take a problem and problem solve within the government internally, just with some calls, because we had the system built in. Simultaneously, the Center for Employee Ownership, they were able, like we saw in the session, they were able to do policy advocating, and then, constituents and the implementation. So if we would have the money, or when the money is available, they would have probably been the people who were managing the technical assistant, because our government office cannot do that. So, and within the bill and what the program was, the way that the program was framed from the legislation, from the bill, it was the complete package. So had all the components that the businesses need to be able for us to deliver something that actually is going to have a real tangible accounting. There's other issues that we can talk about it, and what we can measure, what we cannot measure within government, and the limitations that we have for other reasons as repository and counting for companies. That's a very bigger conversation. But as the model that Washington had, I think it's great because we also communicate with the EDOs, we communicate with World Business Development Centers, we communicate with Washington State University. So it was the whole package.
So I would say, Kevin said that the lieutenant governor, right, is the right office, right? So I believe in Rhode Island, the lieutenant governor is in a good position to champion employee ownership in the state of Rhode Island. We're small, and it doesn't make sense for us to start it, I believe. Even I was the president of the Providence City Council. I don't think it should be only in Providence, right? Even though it's our largest, most populated city. I think it has to be at the statewide. And in order to accomplish this at the statewide, the Lieutenant Governor's office in the state of Rhode Island makes sense to champion this, and especially because by statute, the Lieutenant Governor is the chair of the Small Business Advocacy Council. So in our case, I think it makes sense.
It goes statewide.
Statewide.
Yeah.
Well, yesterday, I'm going to set this down here. Joseph gave a terrific talk and a keynote and talked about Eastman from Eastman Kodak and referenced the idea of individuals and people that will make a difference. And I think that it comes down to people. Not every lieutenant governor is going to be the record, but Lieutenant Governor Matos is. And I think that finding the right people, whether they're in government or they're in executive offices, that's the thing that will make the difference ultimately. We had a champion in Philadelphia to do a task force, terrific person, Councilman Derek Green. He left to run for mayor and he didn't win, and we lost our champion, okay? And Erica Strasburger in Pittsburgh, was the person that made this happen for us. So I think people and individuals are critically important.
So following your answers, Kevin and Matt, and then the Governor Matos, so you have the commission, Employee Ownership Commission, Colorado and Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, right? So when you choose these commission members, so you also consider these kinds of like expert or some leaders in this area? So.
Yeah, the commission model, I think it depends on who you ask. People have different views on the efficacy. Personally, I think that it's very productive. I would argue that more decision-making power should be given to them. In the current model in Colorado, there's 12 volunteers. They're all incredible. They've taught me so much about employee ownership and helped me do my job when I was working in government to set up and manage these programs. They approve minutes. I think that they should have some type of fiduciary oversight. I think that they should be able to actually make decisions that will ultimately impact the business owners because right now that type of control remains in the government. And I think we heard yesterday from multiple folks that the level of subject matter expertise with government folks on employee ownership is usually pretty low. It's by chance if it isn't low. So I think there's an opportunity to, give them a little bit more agency or give them a little bit more like decision-making capacity or power. Advocating is one thing, but actually, they're the experts in the space. So, yeah.
And I don't want to take credit for putting the task force together. It really was Councilmember Strasburger and myself together. And we were looking for two things. We were looking for decision makers who were willing to go the extra mile, okay, willing to take some chances if necessary. And we were looking for people that, and this is my term, had a employee ownership heart. Somebody who had an understanding of what this could do for human beings, and that was critically important. And I think that was one of the successes.
Yeah, so you all agree the role of government, like state government or municipal government for the employee ownership, right? So if we can say like employee ownership movement, then the private sectors are not only the entities or players that can make employee ownership successful.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sorry, go ahead. I agree with that, but I don't want this to sound critical, but I have huge faith in state and municipal governments. I don't have the same confidence in federal government, okay? In the 9 years that I've been doing this, we had the Main Street Employee Ownership Act, we had the Work Act, We have the SSBCI, the State Center Business Credit. I haven't seen any real results here, okay? And yet, at state governments and municipal governments, I've seen results. And I have huge confidence in that. And I think you can get kind of closer to the ground when you
I think we need each other. I think we complement and we need each other. Why? Because the businesses do their business and the government regulates them. And the government has the position to facilitate transactions, to understand, a big part is to understand the barriers. Yesterday, I was speaking with somebody about employee ownership. Businesses, if they have a minority designation, doesn't transfer when you when you go to an ESOP. That's a big conversation that can be working through the government and kind of find some regulations that's like, how do we solve this? So I think if the government agency, and of course its people, it is open to have those conversations, we can facilitate and have those solutions that are stopping more conversions. To continue.
I can just add that I think it's not as simple as the more the merrier in terms of players that are, those in the ecosystem, those organizations. But when we look at employee ownership development, from my experience in Colorado, we have a formal center, but formal meaning codified in statute or a government, center. But we also, and long before that center was created, or definitely before it was codified, there were nonprofit development organizations doing the work. So I really do think that the more the merrier there, but it's also, unique when there's a top-down model, that being government, as compared to a more grassroots bottom-up approach. It does require some careful oversight to make sure that there's not duplication of benefits or the things that people are putting out there. There's a lot of inefficiencies in the ecosystem, and I think it's kind of a careful dance to make sure that we're working together to get the job done.
Great. So, what about this?
I just want to build on what Kevin was saying. That's a big issue that we have to keep in mind. When you have a champion, like in Rhode Island right now, I'm a big champion. But what happened when I'm now lieutenant governor? I'm very concerned about that. And that's why we still have not made the decision about what model we're going to use for Rhode Island, because I'm concerned about it. Some people have told me, well, the center should be in your office. But I'm concerned about that. What happened when I'm not the lieutenant governor? Would the center continue? And that's why we're still going through this exercise of learning from others, having the working group talk among themselves, as thinking about what would be the best option, but also collaborating with other general officers. The Secretary of State, if they have their business division, and we work together so well, right? So how can we continue to do more of that, working in collaboration? Because once we get more support from other electors and from other general officers, that's going to ensure that the employee ownership office continue beyond whoever's is in the office right now.
I don't think you need to worry about that, because you can accomplish the same thing when you're governor.
We're going to say rumors now.
So eventually, the question emerges about this because you're mentioning something about efficacy of the ecosystem kind of thing, right? So let's think about one kind of ambitious probably question that, do you think employee ownership in your state or in your municipal area, do you think employee ownership business or program has been successful or not really successful from your perspective? If it is successful, then why do you think so? Do you have any some KPI indicator, or it's not successful? Same thing. Yeah, based on this indicator, it has not been successful. It should develop furthermore. So what do you think?
I think for us, I mentioned in the presentation was, a 14-month-old state program was very successful. When we have 3 transactions, that means that many employees, that means, there's so many billions in payroll, so many millions in revenue, within 14 months, I think is extremely successful because it's needed and it's wanted, and there's interest. I wish we can prove more success, but we can't. And there's also, we don't have the tools, and again, that's another conversation, but we don't have tools to support metrics and data. They don't exist, right? There's no registration process, blah, blah, blah. But in my opinion, we were successful, it is successful, and I believe it will continue to be successful, and whatever we did, it is gonna, now the Center for Employee Ownership will take the lead and will continue to be successful.
So basically, number of business transition to employee ownership.
Yeah, it's the only data that we can qualify, that we can quantify, right? So we can only go by 3 businesses with this money, with that many employees. That's the only thing we have. So if we have quantitative data, if we do qualified, I can tell you I got 125 calls. How many of those are moving forward? I don't know. How many employees do they represent? I don't know. But 120 people calling to our office to be interested at different stages of the transition, even if they were trying to learn, is successful. Educating and telling people what employee ownership is successful. So I do think that it's hard to measure, but it is successful.
Kind of one thing is kind of attention from these stakeholders. Yeah, great.
I could really only agree with that from my perspective. To answer the prompt directly, they don't really use KPIs in government. They should. I think specifically like a CRM type approach to how you're tracking leads with a top-down economic development model would be tremendously helpful, but it's expensive to get things like Salesforce in government. We used a 10-year-old grant package to manage our tax credit programs for the entire state of Colorado for the entire time that I worked there. So, it can be tough to have access to the same tools that maybe your competitors in private equity are using to do the same thing you're trying to do. So in terms of like, are we moving the needle? It's too early to tell. I think when you weren't tracking something before and then you start tracking something, and there's always going to be positive growth there. So I think that we can say, and I think government centers like to say that because it looks good, especially if you're trying to get funded, like at the informal centers. So I think we need more time. I don't think it's wasteful. I think it's sound policy, but I think we need more time.
Yeah.
Well, I'll answer this 2 ways. 10 years ago, Pennsylvania was averaging about 5 or 6 new employee-owned businesses a year. Today, over the last 5 data years, the 5,500 data plus what's available in the co-op space, we're averaging about 20. Okay, so the numbers increased. But I'm going to go back to what Evan Edwards was saying yesterday when he said, there's about 20,000 businesses that transact in any given year in the United States. We get about 300 employee-owned businesses out of 25,000. That's not a success in my mind. And we need to find, the gasoline that's going to allow us to do more. And I think all the efforts that we're talking about, the things that are going on in Rhode Island, the things that are going on in Colorado, the things in Washington State, and 20 other state centers, will eventually make that difference. But I don't think we're there yet.
Great. Well, Sabina, do you want to add something?
So it's very early for us. We still don't have our center. We do have some very successful example of employee ownership, and one of them that is actually is the one that's been highlighted even in other states is the Newport Restaurant Group. It's a very successful model example of a company that is employee-owned, that is very successful and very loved, because we love to support them because we know they're employee-owned. So, but we're still in an early stage for us.
Yeah, great. So this would be the last session for this moderated discussions. After this one, we'll open to the audience. Okay, based on your experience, what is one change you would make to improve the employee ownership infrastructure, anything about employee ownership? What would it be? So one thing you would change.
The biggest challenge to track progress is that there is not a registration system that is reliable and is current. And if we have ESOPs, the only data that we have available is going to the U.S. Department of Labor, and the records are 2 years behind. If we are looking at co-ops or we're looking at trusts, there's nothing reliable. So we were brainstorming internally, like if we go to the Secretary of State, can we get the numbers that are more current? So to me, that is something that is a lesson learned as of the system. I don't want to use the word supporting, but not being in sync of, okay, we want ESOPs and we want to invest all this money, and how do we track them? Because that process doesn't exist. And I can elaborate on that. If I get the numbers from the 2022 record, which one of those are still alive and which ones are just paying the plan, but they're not operating. So that is a big lesson learned as of how can we. And the other thing is within government is how the agencies communicate. I can get the tax records from the Department of Revenue, but I cannot get the labor data from the Department of Employment, and they do not talk to each other. So if the Department of Labor tells me this is the companies and now our ESOPs, blah, 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 it's great. How many employees did I have? I don't know, you gotta go and talk to the other guys. And the other guys is like, well, we really cannot tell you. So, those are challenges and opportunities within government that were some of the lessons learned that we were trying to solve to be able to support and to be able to create some data or some indicators so we can actually advocate for funding with real data.
It's kind of integrative, like agency or person or office.
Is everybody communicating? Because we work on silos, right? The Department of Revenue has one thing, the Department of Labor has another thing, the Department of Commerce has another piece of the puzzle. Licensing has another part of the puzzle, so we are like 5 puzzles. And the great thing is for us, again, because we were such a comprehensive program, was to be able to identify all these silos and all the connections that we need, because we are not a company, we're a government, but we operate like, human resources and data, we're just separate. So that's how I can describe it.
Okay.
So I have to agree. That's a big challenge, is the different silos within state government. And earlier when you mentioned Salesforce, I have to laugh because I started working at the State of Rhode Island Office of Diversity in 2015. And everything went back to Excel, right? I had to start to have an Excel in order to be able to get data from different offices and from different software. And if I wanted to understand and compare data, I have to go back to Excel. Mm-hmm. So I think that we need, as a government, we need to understand that we have to invest in the softwares, in the infrastructure needed in order to be successful.
I think this is the point about ChatGPT or AI can help.
Yes.
Probably, yes. Yeah.
I'll say that, Kevin spoke to this, the strength of, working with the university and colleges in the Pittsburgh area, to be able to achieve this research goal. It wouldn't have been done just by a nonprofit state center alone or just by a, Pennsylvania government state center either. I mean, they had to work. They did things that probably one of those stakeholders couldn't have done on their own in terms of getting the contacts and getting the job done. So, I think if we identify more players and look at the resources that we all have together, that's how we can get things done. In Colorado, we did research with the Exit Planning Institute to look at owner readiness, and that's often the lead that we use when we're trying to get more done, because those numbers are quite compelling to folks both in government and not. So I think it's important to look at all the available resources because, the funding often is not enough, whether it's one center, formal or informal. So working with the folks that can help you achieve the goal, working with more folks can help you achieve your goal based on, all the things that you shared together.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, what will we change? Assuming we can't get Taylor Swift to write a song about it. And I'm not kidding about this. A president.
Do you know Taylor Swift's house is in Rhode?
Rhode Island.
Yeah, her second house.
We are the 13th state.
30 minutes from my house.
Wait a second. She's from Pennsylvania. Just a second. And I'm not joking about this. I don't know if it's a change, but an ad, a president that talks about employee ownership, speaks about it. Ronald Reagan spoke about it. A president today that speaks about it, instead of showerheads.
Okay. So, okay. Now we open to discussion to the audience here. So do you have any question, comment, or suggestion? Tanner?
Tanner, yeah. Good panel, good discussion. I'm curious, because y'all live in the world of politics more than I do. I recognize that there is bipartisanship on this issue, but I also am not naive to think that you don't get a lot of dissent and pushback. So I'm curious, when the negatives fly at you for these initiatives, what are the leading arguments that the other side is throwing? And I mean that like left or right side, is like the naysayers to this initiative. What are they saying, whether it's unfounded or not, in terms of like why this should not be either a use of taxpayer money or a priority of the state and the city?
This politics, I'll take it. So earlier I was speaking about this. Normally I'm Democrat, so I'm going to speak bluntly about the stereotypes that one party has against the other, right? For Democrats, we say, well, Republicans only cares about business. Republicans says Democrats just want social services, socialism, right? And honestly, employee ownership, I think, is something that isn't right in the middle. It's the business, and it's also have the social component. One of the things why I'm the most excited about employee ownership is because I can see how we can get capitalism to work for more people. So we are able to we're able to build more millionaires, right? And that's the way how I'm talking about it. And when people from the left comes at me, this is my argument. And when people from the right come at me, I tell them, well, I want to create more millionaires. That's my goal.
In my experience in my daily work, I never felt the push. It was, I mean, even without commissioners, was seamless. I mean, it was not, and even though we're not having the funding, has nothing to do with politics, has to do with a governor that is being extremely responsible to make sure that we have a balanced budget. But it was never, to the contrary, when we were like back and forth with the deals to eliminate, there was like both parties kind of came together to kind of vote to make sure that it stayed in statute. So I never in my daily operations felt any controversy or push in either one. So it was a great experience in that regards.
It's a great question, okay? And full disclosure, yes, there are voices, but they don't override the other voices. And the typical, issues are more government. Okay, we really don't want more government money. Okay, because and also that there are so many other important issues. Thad talked this morning about sort of the hierarchy of needs, and I asked him after the session, are we too far down the list right now? And thankfully he said, no, I don't think we are. I think economic development is somewhere that's important. But food insecurity, poverty, education, et cetera. These are significant issues, and in some cases we have to get in line. Quite good question.
I will just add that I don't think I mentioned this, but maybe you all just assumed it because you all can read my mind. All of our bills have bipartisan support. The only holdouts that I can remember, I can't recall every single vote at every committee hearing. I wish I could. I got like half of them maybe. The only holdouts recently that we had were like one or two like just anti-tax credit programs and budget concerns. And, I just point to like the solid strike of the entire program in Washington. That was purely a budget concern from their governor. So usually it's anti-program, anti-government, or budget concerns.
And if I can add to that, normally when you get, in my experience, right, when I'm speaking with people that are more liberal, you talk about the co-op and they're on board. When you're talking to people who are more conservative, you talk about the ESOP, and they're on board. So I think this is we can save America because we can unite both sides through employee ownership.
I think the Lieutenant Governor brings up a great point. A lot of these bills in the more recent sense focus on more than one structure. I think this form agnostic approach that we've talked about during this programming at length is super important here. And I think it makes it harder to highlight maybe holdouts, because if you were to run something that was pure co-op or pure EOT or pure ESOP, you may actually get more folks that were not aligned. So being able to, broaden eligibility might speak to some of the bipartisan nature of the recent legislation, at least at state level.
Great. Yeah. Please.
Let me ask Kevin, actually, and the gentleman from Colorado, your first name? Matt. So here we have two examples on the panel of Kevin's been at this a long time, doing a great job, not in a government program, but in an independent nonprofit, and not, as if I understand it, making use of any kind of incentives, grants, or whatever for feasibility studies. And Colorado is rather intensive in that. And you started off, Kevin, quite appropriately saying there's not one way to do this, but still it would be great to hear you reflect as to what your thought process, how your thought process has gone back and forward. Like, should you have $5,000 grants or $10,000 grants in the back of your pocket to move things along or not, and that kind of thing?
Good question, Chris. I wouldn't want the center to have the money. I wouldn't want us to be the deliverer of funds. We want to stay.
Okay, so that's my question, yeah.
Yeah, we want, but I would like to, and my thinking has evolved a bit. I used to think that, all we have to do is go out there and, start screaming, get a megaphone, everything's going to be great. We're going to, well, that's not how the world works. And I think that there are two things going on right now that will be really helpful. One is the legislation that we've talked about, the federal, that's going to deal with the mezz debt issue. Okay, and that's, there are a couple of really big deterrents today to the larger employee ownership, to ESOPs, and one is the sellers having to take some paper back, and that's going to help that. The second thing is some funding for feasibility studies, and I think that at a local level, at a state level, we can start doing those kinds of things, and that's going to encourage people to do it. If you're selling your company to private equity, you're not going to put a penny up front. Okay, they're going to take care of it. Now you're going to pay for it, but you're not going to pay it up front. And I think that those couple of things can be really helpful. There are some things, but I'll go back to what I said. Initially. We got to find ways to get people to know about this. They just do not know about it. And we can make all the legislation we want. We can do marvelous research, which is extraordinary. But if we don't get people to know about it, it's not going to help.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when we look at some of these innovative subtractions, especially with the most recent bill that's just landed on Governor Polis's desk, sometimes appropriating budgets for research to figure out if something is a good approach could be a good step. I mentioned that the 2024 session bill was the first time we had funding for the office. That was just for salary. So money to support learning more can help the legislature, can help the governing bodies, it can help the entire ecosystem. So I think that there's more to be done there. And then in terms of the tax credit structure, being refundable is pretty unique. I didn't know that that the majority of tax credits were not refundable dollar for dollar. The Colorado employee ownership tax credits have been, but at 50% and at post conversion. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of steps to get to that point. And a lot of those steps are smart, informed business decisions that can help the business regardless of what path they take. So I think we need some earlier kind of gates, and I would like to see a higher coverage rate at that dollar for dollar, because it's just going to incentivize folks more. So learning more and paying more, I guess, is the TLDR.